It's time to get your checking account to zero with free checking from PenFed. That's zero ATM fees, zero balance requirements, and zero time spent waiting for your paycheck to direct deposit because you can receive it up to 2 days early. Open your account with just $25 and see how big zero can be. Apply online today at PenFed.org/free checking. Early direct deposit eligibility may vary between pay periods and timing of payers' funding. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed, insured by NCUA.
PenFed's got great rates for everyone.
Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Dale Luginbill from FullScale Outdoors. Thanks for being on here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Did I pronounce the last name right?
You did. Good job.
Okay,
A lot of people screw that up.
I listened to a couple podcasts and tried to hear how it was pronounced and then replicate it.
That's pretty smart.
So you're up to almost 200 podcasts at this point, I also learned. Is that right?
Yeah, getting there. 197, I think. Probably would have cracked them out this week, but I had some technical difficulties on my end. Speaker cords and such not working. And I'm like, well, I guess it'll happen next week.
What have you, like, how have you grown or how have you changed over those episodes? Because this is 211 for me. Okay. And I listened to some of the first ones and I kind of hear a change and maybe the angles are a little bit different or I'm a little bit more comfortable. Like, how do you think that you've changed over those 190 some episodes?
I think I've become a better communicator as far as I used to have a really bad problem with talking over people. I just kind of learning that flow, that feel of a conversation. And as like the host of a show, and I have a background in broadcasting. I was in small market radio. I went to school for it and stuff. So it's dead air is like the devil, right? And so if you're interviewing somebody, you're talking to somebody, and maybe they're just trying to find a word or trying to figure out how they're going to articulate their next point, and there's a little bit of a lull, I have this tendency to just like jump in to fill that dead air. And then a lot of times you end up starting to talk again at the exact same time, or you interrupt their thought process. You kill that entire point they were getting ready to make, or a story doesn't get told because you derailed them. And it's just not clean to listen to either. That's something I noticed that I was doing a lot early on. I had all sorts of catchphrases that I was, or I should say, not catchphrases, but crutch phrases, crutch words that I was using a lot. That you just pick up and don't know you say, like, right? You know, every time you finish saying any point, right? It's like, oh my God, when you go back and listen to it, I don't know, maybe the listeners don't notice it that much, but I was like, I have got to stop doing that. Yeah. And so I was hyper aware of that. I fixed that problem. That's kind of where it went. I mean, I keep my podcast pretty casual. The one I just did with Dean Tolugan from Premier Flight in Rochester, Minnesota, who I guide for in the spring for snow geese. He was like, "Where's your note?" He knew already. He's known me for a while, and he just made the joke. And when he came in to sit down and record, he's like, "Where's your notes?" I was like, notes. I mean, sometimes I'll have real basic notes, like if it's a name I think I'm gonna forget, or just some like bullet points, like just to kind of keep me on track, but no like real notes. I like to just sit down as if we were at the bar or something and just just freestyle. That's was kind of the intention of like why I started this podcast. So it's just kind of get more real conversations. Yeah.
I definitely take some notes. I come from a journalism background. That was my degree. And then I got a master's in it too, but I'm a teacher now. But I do some freelance writing on the side and I'm a columnist, but it's important to me to, from that journalistic background, to have some sort of angle and do some sort of pre-reporting. That way you can hit some things if needed. But I'd say that of the notes that I come into a podcast with, I only use maybe half, just because maybe steer the conversation a little bit or make sure we hit some certain things so you don't go totally down a rabbit hole. But yeah, like you said, people listen to podcasts because they want real conversation. Some of the podcasts that are kind of an interview, those can be really interesting too. But I think the podcasts are so popular because it is people talking about and going back and forth about issues and things like that. So I think that's why it's popular.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a time and place for them, and to be honest, like I'm not trying to make excuses. I probably should have notes. It's probably just laziness on my part. But like you said, I think I think early on I used to do notes and just found like I never use them. I go off script all the time, and I do enjoy straight up interview podcasts from time to time, but I would definitely say the ones that I get lost in and the ones that have made podcast a popular media is that natural flow of conversation. And I don't go down, I don't fight like to go down a rabbit hole. The rabbit hole opens up, I jump in that thing feet
Yeah.
first and like let's go, because that, to me, that's where the real stuff happens. That's the like whatever the subject matter, whether it's hunting, fishing, or foraging, or whatever it might be, you share other commonalities with people. Like it's not always just about that, and someone wants to start talking about movies and you go and we're going, it's like, but in the back of my mind, I know it's still there. And then I wait for that lull, or you kind of try to get in time with the ups and downs of the conversation, the ebb and flow of how it's going. And when you feel that rabbit hole kind of starting to get to the end, then you just bring it back around and then you hopefully jump back in where you left off and get back on subject. But man, I appreciate those rabbit holes. I really like it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, but you certainly can't take your guest down with you, right? You do have to kind of go together. If it's like, I'm jumping for this rabbit hole, come with me.
Yeah.
I gotta have it.
True.
So what do you want to accomplish with the podcast? This is something that I just kind of keep thinking about, over the episodes, that, what type of value am I bringing, and what do I want to do with this? Do you have like a mission statement or something like that, where you want to go with the podcast, what it's providing for people?
My mission statement is mostly just to entertain. But on a personal level, it was to scratch the itch, because I had that, I was in small market radio and it didn't pan out for me. And this was like 25 years ago. And it just, it didn't pan out. Started a family and just couldn't support the family on small market radio salaries, which, to put it in context for people, I had a job and I was a program director with the morning show in a small town in Iowa, working an insane amount of hours a week, like 70 hours a week. And my income was $1,750 a month gross. So once the child came along, it's like, I can't, as a single guy, living in an efficiency apartment, eating ramen noodles, you could pull it off and get to a bigger market, but man, there's no way. So that kind of forced me out of the industry, but I always really enjoyed it and had the desire to get, like, I toyed with the idea of, doing maybe a weekend gig at a local radio station, or maybe as a second job, just weeknights or something, because I just always kind of wanted to do that. And then podcasts came along, and it's something that I don't have a ton of regrets in life, but one of the regrets that I have is not doing this much sooner. I always joke that in my mind, I was this close to inventing the podcast. I literally it was so close, because when I had gotten out of it, and then when I got into it, they were still teaching on reel-to-reel editing. So digital editors were like brand spanking new. In fact, we had one of the first ones in the school that you could get. And these programs, I don't know what you use to put your podcast together. I use Adobe Audition, but it's basically what we learned on. And those programs are like $10,000 back in the day. And I thought, God, if I had the money to get one of these digital editors, and this is why I say almost invented the podcast, because I was thinking more of producing commercials. And I thought, because when you drive across the country and you're listening to small market, the production quality is garbage. I mean, it just,
Mhm.
you got really inexperienced people on simple equipment. They definitely don't have digital editors. And I thought, wow, I could probably make these commercials from my home, and you can email the file back to this radio station in Nowhereville, Kansas, and they could have a high quality commercial produced for their local businesses, and it would just make their radio, I'm like, that's all I did all day was make commercials for radio stations around the world. That wouldn't be a bad gig. And then I always on top of that, I always wanted to start my own like fishing reports, fishing show. And I would have just kind of done that on the side, but I wouldn't have put it on. Again, this is where the almost part comes in. I wouldn't have put it on the internet for anybody to consume. I probably would have tried to like syndicate it, the old model of radio, and reach out to smaller markets that could afford to pay me. I wouldn't be asking these large sums of money. I'd be getting what they, small amounts of money. But if I had it in enough of these small markets on my end, I'd be making some money. And just sat on it and never did it. And then when the podcast kind of came around and I saw these programs get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, it's like, I often think, had I done that way back in the day, and I had already had the infrastructure, not to mention the network with who knows whichever state I was in at the time, like where I would be right now. Like it's kind of a crazy thought, but that's not how it worked out. So I'm glad I drug my feet. Even when I knew I was going to do it, I just drug my feet. And finally, I was like, one day I just said, I'm so tired of talking about it, and just went online, ordered the stuff, and started. And yeah, and now here we are, almost 200 episodes later.
I think that's such a common story of pretty much anybody doing anything, as far as just that thought of something that people want to do. And I don't know what the percentage is, but it definitely seems like a lot of people have these ideas, dreams, whatever, and then they don't follow through. And even as something as simple as a podcast, it's not a huge deal, but it can be,
Right.
Then you talk about quality of equipment. If you were to break it down percentage wise, do you think that a successful podcast is like 90% content, 10% quality of equipment? Is it 50-50? Like, what do you think is the most important thing when creating a podcast? Good gear
Content.
or content?
I'd give it 75-25. 75 content, 25 quality of broadcast. I think I'm giving the quality of broadcast higher marks than I probably should. I can list, and this is me personally, and everybody, everybody's different. I know some people are like, I hate phone interviews. I just can't, the sound throws me off, and everybody has their little hangups. But for me, if that can easily be overpowered, if the content is good enough, if I'm really into a conversation, if it cuts out once in a while, as long as I'm not missing the core of the conversation, like I get it. I mean, we've all had a conversation on a cell phone in bad service area where you cut in and out. It doesn't, unless it gets really, really bad, I'm going to fight through it and continue talking to my friend on the phone. And that's the same way for me, at least with listening to content. So I give it to 75-25 because if it's to the point where it's distracting, the audio quality is so bad, then sure. Then it's like, I'm not even paying attention to what they're saying. It's now overpowered the content. I can't do this. With that said, I don't know that I can't really remember a time where that's happened to me. So, I mean, I've listened to a few podcasts where they had the phone sitting in between them on a car ride, and they're on their way to a hunting adventure or fishing adventure or whatever. And that was the podcast, and you hear the road noise in the background, and honestly, it just falls away at some point in time, and you just if the conversation's good enough, you get lost in the conversation and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I've had a couple of those that I've listened to, and It is. It's just, it seems super authentic, because it reminds you of when you are in a vehicle and you're talking to a buddy post hunt. And so it's totally non-distracting.
Yeah.
There
Right.
have been a couple episodes where people have brought like really good gear, like into the mountains, and they talk about, oh, we're on a mountainside here scouting, but the sound quality is so good. You almost think, wait, what? Like, there should be like a little swish. There should be something in the background. Like you hiked
Yeah.
with your gear all the way up there. It's kind of crazy. It's almost like the reverse. But I had a review because I was resisting getting expensive stuff, and I had a review because I did one of those cell phone record the conversations. We're sitting at a table, and the cell phone was just sitting down on the table, and my buddy's kid in the background, it just picked up that. And every time you tap the table, it would pick that up. And so it was just terrible. And someone left a review that said, great content, but terrible sound quality. And I thought, oh no, I got to do something about this. So that kind of pushed me over the edge. But, you want to put in enough money to make it good, but you don't want to spend so much money on it that, you're just hemorrhaging money every month because of, you're not making anything on the back end. And there's some level of it that's just, to scratch that itch, as you said, but, got to have some quality in there.
Right. And for me, it's like the money on the back end would be nice. I mean, I've made a couple dollars off of this podcast, but I still have a real job for a reason.
Yeah.
What I like it to get, and this seems like I might be contradicting myself, but would I like it to get to a point where like, this is my job? Yeah, that'd be amazing. But that was never the point of this. I didn't go into it. I didn't start this thinking with this long, like, short-term, midterm, long-term goals of how am I going to turn this into a career? This was always scratch the itch. It's something I wanted to do. And if it never made $1, I still do it. The great part about it is I meet people, like my network just expands, like
that.
And I love that about what this medium can bring. I mean, I would never more than likely have ever had a conversation with you if it wasn't for podcasts.
No.
I mean, it's unless I randomly ran into you at a bar somewhere, and I haven't been to Alaska, so I don't know how that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to go, but
Of course. So when you started out, or you're like with the money part, is it weird asking for money? When I say asking for money, but my first column that I ever wrote as a freelance writer, I did for free. And then I wrote another because I was living in California at the time. I said, hey, I'm going back home to Alaska. Can I write a weekly column about just what I do up there? And they're like, sure, can't pay you. All right, that's fine. So for a month, I did a free column. And I thought, man, this is a lot of fun. But I want to get paid. But I felt like, am I good enough to get paid for doing this? And, with a podcast, same sort of thing. It's like, okay, I put some time to this. I think this is worth ads or payment or Patreon or something. And then in the guide world too, like how do you know you're at the point where you are good enough at something that it can be monetized? Otherwise you just get exploited, right? You're doing all this stuff for free, right? So how do you gauge that, and how do you know if it's good enough to monetize?
yeah, that's the rub. And I think I know I struggled with that, and it's that self-worth thing. Your time is definitely worth money, and I know that, but I think we often build up these unrealistic expectations. And it was the same thing for me, like with my guiding. It's like, what do I charge for guiding? And all you can really do is go off of what else is in the market, and kind of, for me, it's like, we'll find a happy medium, maybe on the lower side to get started, just to get your foot in the door. But you to what I'm trying to say, the catch-22 of it is like, to get good at it, you need to be good at it. So you need to spend a lot of time doing it. Well, if I'm out there doing it, I'm not working. So my bills don't care. Like they don't care what I'm doing, what my goals are. The energy bill is the energy bill every month. It doesn't matter. So your time does need to be compensated, and it's a delicate balance. But for me, I've just kind of I did a little bit of market research, and that's a fancy way of saying I Googled. That's a fancy way of saying I looked up 4 or 5 different guide services, saw what they were charging, said, okay, these guys are on the higher end, but they've been doing it for 30 plus years. This guy, is doing it out of a leaky John boat. He's charging this. I'm gonna find somewhere in the middle, and you just arbitrarily say it.
Mhm.
And what I found is that you still like it's that skill of, am I worth it? You put a lot of pressure on yourself. Well, you're definitely more skilled than the person that's about to hire you. There's a reason they're looking for a guide. You have some knowledge to pass on to them. So that's your product, and just have faith in your product. That was a lesson I had to learn. And as far as the podcast goes, that was a little more, as I've reached out to sponsors, and that's the Wild West out there. I mean, there's like, to go online and try to figure what it out, then you get like CPMs and all these acronyms that I'm not familiar with. And I just didn't know, it's like, I don't know what I should be charging. And there is no should. It's almost like, get what you can get. You hit somebody with an email, you throw your metrics on there. I always try to explain, because believe it or not, a lot of people and a lot of businesses aren't really familiar with what a podcast is yet. I don't know if they just, it's weird. And they compare everything to the old broadcast model of radio and TV or print. So when you tell somebody, or they ask you like, well, how many listeners do you have? First of all, if they say how many listeners you have, you're dealing with somebody that is on the radio model, because we don't have listeners, we have subscribers and or downloads, which is generally our metric for podcasts. That number is going to be, even if you're like, well, obviously Joe Rogan get away with it, but even if you're a pretty successful podcaster, like even Steve Rinella on Meat Eater, I guarantee you his numbers aren't as good as some major market morning radio show. But as far as advertising dollars are concerned, I think he has way more value in his downloads or his subscribers. And the reason being, it wouldn't be so much if he was advertising for Pepsi, right? That's like, I don't know if you're going to be interested in drink Pepsi or not. You might be a Coke person. You might not even drink soda at all. Maybe you're a health nut. I don't know. You're casting a broad net. And that's the kind of radio model you want to catch as many ears as possible. And hopefully somebody in that net wants or is interested in your product. The difference, and I think the big leg up that podcasts have, if you're at least advertising for something in the outdoor space, if you have a hunting podcast and you're advertising hunting gear, nearly 100% of people listening to your show are interested or potentially interested in that product.
Mhm.
And that's just something that radio, TV, and print can't. I mean, I guess print could, and if you're looking at like outdoor magazines and that, but radio and TV for sure, they can't claim that. It's like, and because these conversations are far more intimate in a podcast than in radio and television, the consumers of the podcast medium are far more likely to take action. They develop a relationship with that host, and it's as an influencer, I hate to use that term, but they're just, and it's, how do you quantify that? Because they, like, on the business scale, going back to like trying to prove that you have value to this would-be advertiser or would-be sponsor. It's like, how do you, that's not a hard metric. You can show them. And I think one of the workarounds to that is when they started giving these like use promo code whatever at checkout. That was a way for a company to kind of track, okay, how much traffic am I getting back from this investment of advertising on the show? But
after years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plans shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
that was a long-winded answer.
Well, it's such an interesting thing. And I actually haven't heard a whole bunch of podcasts kind of dive into that. I think most people are, and maybe for good reason, maybe people are like, dude, talk about elk, talk about,
Yeah.
I want to hear about snow geese. I don't want to hear about, metrics and whatnot. But I think it is an interesting phenomenon in that, you look at the print industry, it was, Field and Stream, Outdoor Life, and some other magazines, maybe regional. So I think that when the podcast started to blow up, the hunting, outdoors, fishing market, just there's so much there because you can get so much more stories. Like so many people are craving stories, information. And I think it really blew up. But I think there's a large portion of the population, like you said, is just they wake up in the morning, they get in their car for their commute, and they're just turning the radio on. And that's already preset to their morning show. And that's what they go through. So, the new podcast on their phone, that's a whole different thing. They haven't subscribed. They haven't have it uploaded. They don't have a way to listen to it as they go. So I think there is that transition. It's starting to happen. I think there's some, political shows and, but I think the outdoor world just loves the outdoors, podcast. There's so much out there. About how many podcasts do you subscribe to, listen to?
Oh, that's a good question. I try ones that I actually subscribe to. I can do a quick count in my head. About 5, maybe 6, and then there's some that I just check in from time to time. But I also like to find new ones, constantly find new ones, and just seeing what's out there, and try to get a better feel of the what's the word I'm looking for? Zeitgeist. There it is. There's a fancy word. Just keep your finger on the pulse of what people are talking about, and not that I solely use that, but I think it's important to stay relevant.
I think it's difficult because when you do, there are so many podcasts out there. It kind of takes you back to that point of, okay, well, what am I providing? Like everyone is talking about everything. There's so much out there. I can't listen to every podcast. I can't know everybody who's out there. Like there's a name who I have no idea who this person is, but apparently in the whitetail community or in the elk community or whatever, this person is a massive name, big influencer. And like, well, how do I, what's my thing? Do you ever just look at the sheer volume of podcasts and then kind of go back to a square one and think, oh my gosh, where do I fit in all this stuff?
Well, I know there's maybe this is just me telling this to myself to keep me going, but there's something for everyone out there, and everybody has a different angle on it. Even if you're talking about the same subject, you're not going to get the same show. You take 6 different people and talk stand hunting for whitetails. You're going to get 6 different conversations. The core stuff might be pretty similar, but the rabbit holes are going to be different for sure. If there are rabbit holes, if they go, unless they're very on track. But they're going to be different. To personalize it, so there's 2 other podcast shows here in my market in Minnesota that I'm friends with the host, Patrick Olson from the Lone Angler podcast and Doug Glimmerbean from the SmackDown Outdoors podcast. And we've developed a really good friendship over the years, and I'll be on their show and they'll be on mine. We've done shows together. We just constantly helping each other out. And, if I hear a guest on Doug's show, that kind of gives me the green light. Like, hey, that person is like that. He's taking care of one of the barriers. And it's like, when you're looking for guests and you reach out to people, whether it's, social media personalities or whatever, and you hit them up, you don't know if they're even interested in being a guest on a podcast. They've heard of a podcast or anything like that. Well, if I hear one on somebody else's show, all right, well, he obviously, this is something he's willing to do. To me, that's like a soft target for me. Now I can hit him up later. And I used to be really hesitant about that because I'm like, well, I don't want to keep poaching Doug's guests or, whoever's guests. But 2 things in talking to Doug, he doesn't care, because I always hit him up first just as a courtesy call. And maybe he's got better contact info, or he, has a personal line on him and can get him on the show easier. But also it's like in the times that we've had the same guest, if you go back, like I was saying earlier, and listen to both of our shows with that same exact guest, you get 2 wildly different conversations because Doug and I are wildly different. And the things that I'm curious about and the things that he's curious about, totally different. So the questions that we ask are going to be different. The way we navigate that conversation is going to be totally different. So I try to keep that in mind when going after guests, that if I think they've been on everybody's podcast, you can kind of use that as a way to self-sabotage and like, well, I'm not even going to reach out to that person. Well, all you're doing is denying yourself an opportunity. You don't know, you might be his 80th interview, your first time with that person might be his best one ever. You don't know. Don't sell yourself short. You got to put yourself out there.
Yeah. I think one of the main things that I've had to keep focused on is make it something that I would like to listen to and something that I'm interested in. If I try to be like somebody else, it's not going to work. Right. You got to look at who I am, where I am, what I do, and answer those questions through the questions that you ask in a podcast and take the podcast there. Like at this point, we're half hour in and we haven't talked about snow geese at all, but this is something that I would be really interested in if I was just starting out and I heard a podcast about 2 people who had been in the market. If you listen to Steve Rinella or, one of those massive names, it's, you just keep after it. It's like, well, you got to that stratospheric level. Like you're the outlier, like not everybody's going to have a podcast like Meat Eater. So what are the other people?
And
doing?
he had a leg up. And his market was already
exactly.
He already had the show, so he had a built-in audience right out of the gate. I mean, I think you could definitely set yourself up for failure as a new podcaster or a would-be podcaster if you're comparing yourself to Meat Eater. I mean, you're probably doomed from the start.
100%.
We again, going back with Patrick and Doug, we have conversations, and I generally try to not look at my metrics. I look at my numbers that often. They're going to be what they're going to be. When it comes down to like reaching out to a sponsor or something, I'll have to go then take a look at it. But I don't want to be obsessed with whether there is an uptick or a downtick this month. I think you can lose sight of why you're doing it. And again, like, you do you. Like, don't lose your voice along the way trying to be commercial. Well, then what are you going to turn into? You're going to turn into white bread. There's not going to be any substance to it whatsoever, because you're just going to want to try to placate to people and be as broadly attractive, I guess, for lack of a better word, and you're going to end up being boring is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then your numbers probably aren't going to be very good because
Yeah.
who wants to listen to that? If I want to listen to that, I'll turn the radio on.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love about these conversations is communicating with other people who are in the struggle present. Like it's right now, these are the things that I'm thinking about, right? This is, you come out of a podcast, like that was a great one. And then, man, that wasn't very good. And, you don't have those listeners. And should I even keep going with this? It's taking a lot of time and maybe I could do something else. And that's just so applicable with everything. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It can be, writing, sewing, knitting, guiding, whatever you're doing, any sort of creating any sort of product. Like that's the same sort of insecurities that everybody feels. And so it's so applicable to a lot of people.
It is. And it is a big commitment. And I think a lot of people like on the sidelines, even friends and families of mine just don't quite understand it. It's basically an unpaid part-time job. Like they're like, oh, we're doing this. I'm like, I can't, I got a podcast at 7. I can't, I can't, I got this, and it just is what it is. And what I would say to anybody thinking about starting a podcast is for sure, do it. You got nothing to lose. I mean, I have a ton of people that have, since I've done it, have reached out to me, and I know they've reached out to other podcasters, how do you do it? How do you get started? And it's super easy, and they get hung up on some of the stuff we've already talked about as far as the equipment. And I tell them, you can use your phone. I go, and I'll even to the point, I'll say, just use your phone for the first few times. You're going to have to work out the kinks. Like it's going to be rough the first few times. If you're not used to listening to yourself talk, it's going to be weird to you to just start talking. So go ahead and do a couple of rough drafts on your phone and listen back to it and see what it sounds like and make some adjustments. With that said, the other thing I usually throw in is just because you record something doesn't mean you have to release something. And I think a lot of people are expecting perfection right out of the gate, and it doesn't have to be that way. The caveat to both of those things is know that the vast majority of podcasts that start, I think it's like 7, don't make it. It's 7. I think it's episodes. Like they don't make it past the 7th episode. Like that's the kill point. And then the other kind of mile marker I've heard, and I haven't verified any of this. It's on the internet. It's on the internet, so it must be true.
Yeah, research, Google.
Yeah, but if you make it past a year, there's a higher percentage that you'll keep going. And and then common sense kicks in at that point. The longer it goes, the better chance it has of just being there in perpetuity.
So over your episodes, you've probably talked about specific moments when you're hunting and fishing. Isn't that it's like such an impossible thing to do, but because you are talking to someone who's hunting and fishing, they kind of know it. But when you're just trying to describe what it's like when the deer comes in, when the fish hits, when the geese come over top, like how do you explain that moment? Or do you just kind of smile and sit back and like, oh, dude, when they're just coming in, like, how do you explain that moment?
Yeah, I guess it would probably depend on who I'm talking to or with. Like if I have a guest or I do a solo episode usually every week called Recap and Rant, where I kind of recap what I did that weekend. And then I try to hit some sort of current issue in the outdoor space, give my opinion on it. And that's just me. And when I do those and I'm trying to describe, I assume that not everybody listening knows what I'm talking about. There are a lot of all around outdoorsmen. I'm being one of them. I like to hunt. I like to fish. I like to forage. I kind of got my toes in every pool. But there's some specialists out there. I know a handful of guys that they duck hunt or goose hunt. That's it. They don't care about fishing at all. It bores them to tears. So I have to keep that in mind, that if I'm going to tell a fish story, I can't just glaze over some important bits of information. I might have to take a quick 15 seconds and describe what flipping is.
Yeah.
Otherwise they're not, the conversation's not going to matter. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So in my solo episodes, I have a tendency to try to at least give a little more background. If I catch myself saying a term that I think might not be widely understood, then I'll try to preempt that with a quick description. I don't want to get lost in the details of it either and then lose the whole feel of the story. But I try to keep in mind that not everybody knows what I'm talking about. But if I'm having a conversation with a goose hunter, and as a goose hunter, I'm probably going to blow past some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would, if I stopped and I said, okay, let's describe what this is. And sometimes I might do that if I think it's obscure enough that maybe some duck hunters don't even know what we're talking about here. But I'll kind of just let that conversation go for the most part, because I think the people listening to that one are probably also going to be diehard goose hunters, and they're going to know.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be some assumed things in there, but that was a good question. That was a weird balancing act you gotta as a communicator just kind of be aware of.
Yeah. The jargon is so important in making you sound like you know what you're talking about. So you have to use that jargon. But sometimes it can kind of get in the way. I was on the Muley Monday podcast. My buddy Jaden was interviewing and talking about hunting for blacktail in Southeast Alaska. And I thought I was doing a really good job of explaining to people, because his listeners are more, Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, mule deer hunters. And so I was explaining, alpine and just these sort of things that might, make people think, wait, what is that? And then I started talking about muskegs. And I was like, and then you're going around the edge of the muskeg. You want to work the transition of the muskeg. And Jaden was like, what's a muskeg? I was like, oh, dude, I thought I was doing a good job of explaining all the context. So you knew what I was talking about. But muskeg is it's such a unique Southeast Alaska thing. But it's pretty funny. Because all storytelling is, you're telling it to someone who wasn't there, and you have to communicate enough details where you're not necessarily putting them there, but they have enough information to know what was going on, and then also what they should take from it. Like, you're telling me this story. Okay, well, what's the point? And it's pretty fun to get with good storytellers who can keep you there, keep you along, and then have something for you at the end. But it's a lot of fun to listen to those people.
It's an important balance to know like who your audience is, and to know when you have to fill in those blanks. Before television, when everything was descriptive, you go back to some really old books, like Zane Grey. I'll just use this as one of the. I don't read a ton, but I remember reading this one, Riders of the Purple Sage, and that book was kind of hard to read for me, because you can tell it was written in a time, way before television, because the author describes everything in incredible detail. The way the air felt, tasted, smelled, the dirt beneath their feet, the wheel, how the wheel on the wagon was constructed, and like all this minute detail, because he needs to build a story. He needs to build the picture in your mind. And without people ever being to the West, they have no basis to draw from. Somebody in New York has never seen a sagebush. They don't know. So I have to describe everything about it to set this stage. And it's like the first 3 chapters of that book are nothing but descriptions. It's crazy. And what I found interesting in that book was like, it was easier to read when I kind of put myself in the mind of this person is writing this in a time where people don't have access to that information on their own. He's giving him all this information the first time. And it's the reason he's painstakingly describing all this stuff. And I just found that incredibly interesting. Like the process that he was aware of, that he had to do. It's like, wow, so we don't have to do that. Everybody has the internet. There's a lot of stuff. Everybody has seen Westerns. There's some things you just don't need to describe. If I say spurs, this cowboy walked in with spurs on, you could be the biggest city slicker in the world. I guarantee
Yeah.
you. And I say that in your mind, you've already conjured up the image and are probably hearing it cling and clang as he walks through the squeaky swinging doors of the saloon. You know what I mean? Like, we've all seen that. We all have that baseline. But without that, you would have to describe that whole scene in a way that people would understand it.
Do you think there is a problem with stereotypes filling in some of those gaps? Like, as soon as you said spurs on the floor, like, I heard them, and then like it set the whole rest of the stage. Like, my mind could not stop but go there. Do you think that people fill in gaps with stereotypes, and can that be used to your benefit, or is that largely detrimental? There's so many stereotypes that come with Alaska, and when people ask questions, they're still asking questions about if it's like the reality TV shows. And I think, oh man, like, I thought you'd be someone who wouldn't go there. Am I really going to have to explain, some sort of deadliest catch thing or Sarah Palin thing? That's such an old joke. Are you really still there?
Can you really see Russia?
Yeah, like, oh my God, that was a joke. She didn't even say that. Tina Fey said that on Saturday Night Live. Oh man, it's crazy. So do you think that people are filling in with stereotypes, and you think that's, or is that something you really deal with?
Stereotypes, I think, I even think that word carries such a weird, for some reason now it has a negative connotation as we've used it in our social structures and social debates, but it's a natural thing that our brains do, that humans do, it's how we survive, is by categorizing things. So that's all stereotyping is. It's a broad categorization. It fits it neatly in this folder, so therefore I can manage my life better. To put it in a real world application in nature, it's like, all right, well, if I touched one cactus and got pricked and I'm bleeding, anything else that even remotely looks like a cactus, I'm like, I ain't touching that one. And there are some cactuses that have like soft needles, if you will, which you can probably get around, you could handle or bump into, and it wouldn't bother you. But you're probably not even going to try it because you already got poked by the first one. It's not worth it. So you're broadly categorizing to navigate your way through the world. That's how our brains work. We put everything in a spot in our minds, and it just helps us. There's so much information. Well, I should have information overload, but so stereotyping isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can definitely be used in a negative way, but the short version of my long answer is yes. I think people do definitely do that when they're listening to stuff, and how else are they going to? I mean, if they know very little about Alaska and all they've seen is life below zero, or deadliest catch, well, what else do they have to go off of? I mean, that's all they have. So yeah, like, I thought Alaska was a barren wasteland. Well, no, we actually have running water. It's kind of crazy.
It's amazing. What are some stereotypes about Minnesota?
Oh, well, you cannot tell somebody you're from Minnesota without them responding to it. Oh, Minnesota, yeah.
Yeah, I had to like fight that a little bit. Oh, he's from Minnesota. Like, oh, he doesn't want to hear that, man.
It does, honestly, it doesn't offend me. I'm so used to it. And to be fair, there are some Minnesotans that sound exactly like that, and maybe even more exaggerated. Like, it is a real thing. And to make it analogous to what we just said, there are some people that live the deadliest catch life. There are some people that do live life below zero in Alaska. Vast minority of Alaska is that way, but there are some people that fit into that block. Same thing with Minnesota. It's like, and people think it's frozen here 365. Like, oh, isn't it cold up there? I'm like, well, in the winter. I mean, it was 95 yesterday, so no. I mean, we're actually not in the Arctic, but people think we are. Anybody south of Minnesota thinks we are pretty much at the North Pole.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions, or not a lot.
None of that's expensive.
Yeah, a lot of the high school kids up in Alaska, they get jobs in the tourism industry during the summers. And so you have people off the cruise ships that come off and they're asking ridiculous questions. So when school's in session and it's also tourism season, I'll kind of say, hey kids, how was the weekend? How are there's always someone that comes up with a, oh, the tourist asked me this or whatnot. But there's people who come up and they ask what elevation Alaska is or Ketchikan is. It's like, you were in the ocean and you stepped off a boat. So, you're 10 feet, 11 feet. I think what you mean is what your latitude, but you said elevation and it's just like, oh man, the questions about, I think, there's a lot of sunlight here. Well, you did book during summer, whoa, what type of currency? Like, do you take American currency? Whoa.
Well, and those kind of things can come from a surprising source, and I'm fairly confident my wife will never listen to this, otherwise she would kill me. But there was a time, I still don't know why she admitted this to me, but there was a time we're at the cabin sitting around the fire talking about whatever. I think that's this time and setting that this happened. That part doesn't matter, but she's like, huh? And I was like, what? So maybe we might have been watching something about Alaska because something like the light bulb went off. And I was like, what? She's like, and there's a little bit of hesitation in her voice, and she probably should have stopped there, but she kept going, and she admitted, she was like, I always thought Alaska was an island. I was like, what? So this is she's very intelligent. She is very well read. She reads, that's what she does. She reads books. She's a movie fanatic. So my brain just didn't know what to do with this information, that she was so off on her geographical knowledge of Alaska, because the thing that my brain kept going back to was like, how did you not up until now accidentally figure that wasn't? And I go, why did you think that? She's like, well, people take Alaskan cruises. I said, yeah, but have you ever heard of somebody driving to Alaska? That's a thing. She's like, yeah, I thought about that, but then I thought, well, they must take a ferry. I'm like, okay, well, you filled in that blank. So you rationalized that one. I was like, don't tell me it's because it's right next to Hawaii on the damn map down there floating in the Gulf of Mexico, because neither Hawaii or Alaska are down there. Like, it never occurred to you that Alaska is really tropical. Or, I mean, Hawaii is tropical. Alaska is cold. But they're right next to each other in the Gulf of Mexico. Like, that didn't seem weird to you? Like, and did you look at the east side of Alaska? Would that be like the eighth wonder of the world? This perfectly straight line. It's just a big cliff. Yeah, they must sit on the edge of the flat Earth, right there, right on the corner.
Yeah,
I could not. My brain, and she swore me to secrecy, which I kept for the longest time until she spilled the beans one time to her brothers, because I wanted to tell her brothers in the worst way, because it's a very sarcastic family. They would have had a field day with it. Mm-hmm. And then she blurted it out one time because she's like, I could tell you were getting ready to say it. I'm like, I wasn't going to say anything. So I was still in trouble, even though I didn't actually say anything. But that's how that goes. It was pretty funny. She still hits me in the arm from time to time when I bring it up. But come on, that's funny.
That is. It's funny with intelligent people. A lot of times there are certain things that you never, like, the brain says this is not important enough to fact check. It's just like, whatever, this is what I think.
Right.
I'm not going to dive any deeper. It's not at all an indication of overall knowledge. It's just, I'm not going to waste my time with those sort of, facts. Like, I don't really need to know that. And so because I don't need to know that, I'm not going to check that. I just want to make sure, because the weather map has Alaska down here by Baja, California, that it's not actually attached there. And it doesn't matter. Right. I just saw this map, the brain computed at a second grade level, and I just left it there because it wasn't at all relevant or important to be going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I brought it up a couple of times. I'm like, well, it depends on which map you look at. Sometimes it's in the Gulf of Mexico, and sometimes it's floating off just the coast of Alaska. You didn't think that was weird? Like, you think it's floating around there like a bog on the lake? Like, what do you think's going on there? And she said exactly what you said. She's like, I just never put that much thought into it. She had her stereotype in her mind. She had, and to her credit, or I don't know if it's credit, but she is more interested in, like, the humanity of the story, whether it's a book or a movie. She's worried about the human drama. She doesn't get caught up in the facts of, I'm the guy I'm watching a show and it's a military scene in the jungle in Vietnam or something, and I hear a common loon in the background. I'm like, well, that's yes. She's like, what? I'm like, there's no loons in Vietnam. And she's like, she rolls her eyes. But I'm a trivia guy. Like that's my head is filled with random facts that mean nothing to anybody but me. So she's more about the character, the human story. So she could have seen a dozen movies about Alaska and read a dozen books that take place in Alaska, and the fact where it falls geographically to her doesn't really matter. She's worried about the protagonist and the antagonist, so
when you travel, and that kind of plays in with some of the things that I like to do when I travel, because I've seen so many people come up to Alaska. I remember growing up as a kid going down to the river, and you'd have these people who were dressed as like, they just bought all the new gear to come fish in Alaska, and they would cross our lines. And I just hated tourists because they would come to the river and they just this entitled attitude, and they were taking our spots. Like, we're just kids, we rode our bikes to the river, and you have these people being jerks. So whenever I go to a different state, I try to remember that even though it's public lands, I'm in someone else's backyard. Right. There's some father-son, father-daughter, mother-daughter, whoever that's out there, and they're trying to have a good time. And I don't want to ruin that. So when you travel to a different place, are there certain stereotypes that you want to get to the bottom of, or are there ethics that you travel with so that you don't look like an idiot?
Well, I don't know that anything is going to save me from looking like an idiot. It's just what happens. But you don't have to travel to Alaska to have people cross your lines. I can tell you that. We just had an incident this past weekend where somebody didn't cross our lines, but we were fishing this spot, and this boat motored right up to us and just started. Like, we could have easily, not even trying, could have flipped our jigs to bring that back in right in their boat. It's like, what are you doing? It's like, so that kind of ethical stuff, or you don't have to travel to a different country to experience that. That can happen anywhere. Some people just seem to be oblivious. But to your question, when I travel, I like to see different. I find it incredibly fascinating, the different subcultures that are there, and even how, let's say, fishing for redfish is totally different in South Carolina as it is in Louisiana, as it is in Florida. Same fish, but regionally they fish for them in sometimes wildly different ways. And they've adapted their tackle to their conditions. And you're like, well, have you ever tried this? And they're like, no, why would I? This works perfect. Or no, because that wouldn't work here. We have too many, there's too many oysters. It'd wreck your stuff. It'd wreck your equipment, in Louisiana, or maybe in Florida, where it's just a sand flat and there's no oysters. You can do some different things. Well, you're not going to get away with that in an oyster bank in Charleston, South Carolina. I find that stuff kind of interesting. Well, not kind of, very.
Yeah, the different methods are interesting. Even in Alaska, catching king salmon on Prince of Wales Island, just a cut plug, just herring, just cut the head off at an angle, 2 hooks, lower down to the bottom, and then reel up. Versus in Ketchikan, where I live now, the little helmet on there that on the herring, and you have a toothpick that goes in there to keep it, and then you troll. So it's 150, 200 miles apart, but the program is totally different. Then you go up further north, and totally different program too. When I go to somewhere that I have never been before, I want to know what type of person lives here year round. Like, there's so much content out there about people who travel there, and this is me fishing or hunting on my 10-day trip or 5-day trip, but who lives there? Well, what is it like for someone who doesn't just live there when it's brochure time? Who's that kid that's cutting your fish, right? And that was always the thing that, again, growing up in Alaska, and my buddies cutting fish, you'd have these tourists who would, just drop off their fish and walk up to the lodge, and that kid who's cutting your fish, like, what are they going to do with the money that they get, right? Where do they want to go? Like, what's your assumption that these kids are just going to cut fish for the rest of their lives? or, this kid who's giving you a kayak tour, she was on a state runner-up basketball team, she's got a 4.0, she's going to go to this college, or this kid that's doing this, they're actually heading to West Point, or this kid is, just getting that idea of who lives here and like who owns this shop. Like, oh my gosh, this is that rich culture. I try to like find that or just absorb that and get that local feel. And just, it reminds me that I'm not a local. And then I think it kind of helps me reel in any sort of entitlement. I'm here to fish. It's like, well, you know what? This person lives here. I should kind of treat this experience as me being a guest and not be so entitled.
Yeah, I think that's a way. I think that's a pretty healthy way of going about it. I mean, I just think you're going to open yourself up to more information, for one, from the locals. I mean, if you go down there with this, like I said, this entitled attitude, they're not going to be very open and welcoming. If you kind of give them their due, if you will, they might feed you some nuggets. Like some gold. They might give you some local knowledge that if you'd have straight out asked them, they'd be like, kick rocks, kid. But if you can kind of build a little bit of rapport with them, show them some respect, and you get that respect back, it's a lot greater chance that they're going to go, hey, if you go down to that point down there and you tie one of these on, you probably have a little bit better luck. Oh, thanks, man. Appreciate it. That's how you're going to get that kind of information. You're definitely not going to get it by walking up there puffing your chest like, I'm a big time fisherman. I don't need to know, like whatever. Yeah, that's not going to work.
Do you ever give, if there's grade A, B, and C information, do you ever give the A information to someone that you don't know? Or is it like maxing out at like the B? Like, I'm going to give you this tip because you're a good person, but I'm not going to give you the really, really good stuff.
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's different factors involved. If they're in my space, like in my hometown, I'm definitely not giving up straight A stuff at any time, because why would I do that? Unless it's their last day of their week-long trip, they haven't caught anything, they're struggling, I'll probably throw them a bone. I'll probably give them a for sure thing, like, hey, go here, try this, you'll catch fish. Because I know they're going to be gone tomorrow. They're not going to be, I'm not giving away something that's going to come back. I'm not going to come back next week and there's going to be 12 boats on my spot, right? Wouldn't give that information to a local, or anybody that could, within driving distance of my spot. That's how you're going to wreck a good spot. But if they're from New York, just to throw that stereotype out there, and they're struggling, yeah, I'll probably give them some grease. I'll give them the good stuff, because I want them to have a good time.
Yeah. Have you ever given grade A information to someone just because they're incapable or they're not going to be able to use it?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty messed up. Right?
Yeah, it's super messed up. And if you do some psychoanalyzing, it's probably to feed my own ego. It's like, I know they're never going to use this, but I'm going to flex a little bit and, whatever, probably whip out the phone and show some pictures and whatever else. Like, yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I haven't indulged myself a time or two in that.
That's great. Well, we're about at an hour here. So what do you got as far as, closing thoughts or other insight or anything that we I know, like when you talk about stuff that we've missed, there's so many other things to talk about, but what do you got to kind of close this things out?
Yeah, we could talk for, like I said, we haven't even really talked about hunting or fishing or any of that stuff. I think it was a good conversation. I think for anybody that's been thinking about starting a podcast or even, writing, have you done any, I'm interviewing you. Have you done anything like, as far as like how we've walked people through the podcast steps? Have you done anything like that as far as anybody wanting to get into journalism? There are a lot of similarities there, or?
I've talked a little bit about the freelance thing with another freelance writer, and getting started out, like the best way to get published is to have been published. It's such a difficult thing. And there's a big, people who want to host or use the articles want to use it for free if possible. And so they don't want to necessarily pay you. So a lot of people are really excited. And you see this with stuff that's on like Meat Eater, like someone connects the Meat Eater people with the information, and they're just so happy that they shared the information that, Meat Eater used my idea. Well, if you would have written something, then, that was the thing. You just gave that to them. And so, again, going back to that confidence of, I have written something here that there's an audience, there's a purpose, this is good, this is worth being published. And then just finding somewhere to use it. But magazines, it's so difficult because the backlog is so long. I wrote an article that'll be coming out for Mule Deer Foundation magazine, and it's not going to come out till next October. And that was, I sent it in 3 months ago. I have an article coming out in Alaska Magazine next March. Like they're that far booked in advance. And so you have to write based on the season. It's so difficult to plan ahead. So it's not, I'm doing this right now, I'm going to send it to a magazine. Well, they're looking at next summer stuff. So you have to have stuff that's super, super timely. And it could be really frustrating doing that. But again, it comes down to the stuff we've talked about with, you have to feel the confidence that what you have is worth being published, and then also worth being paid, because they're going to make money off it. You did the work. I had I submitted an article to a magazine, and in the email, I said, I'm a freelance writer, I'm a columnist, which is kind of I'm expecting to get paid. And they used it without even telling me. Oh, right. And then they put it in the readers' submissions, which is code for this person's going to be so happy that it's published that we don't have to pay them. But, right. And, and I checked up about 4 or 5 months afterwards and say, hey, did you end up using this? Because sometimes it can take 2 to 3 months for people to get back to you about, something that you submitted. And then they said, oh yeah, we published it in July. You weren't going to tell me?
Heads up.
Yeah. And so I thought, man, that's really, really, really messed up.
Oh, yeah, they did you dirty.
Yeah. So that's kind of frustrating, but, just kind of how it is. And so in some other publications are great, and they take care of you, and they're awesome. They get back to you really quick. And it's a lot of fun to be able to participate in the content realm in that way.
Sure. Well, I guess in closing, I would just say if anybody's made it this far, they're obviously interested in at least the workings of the podcast world, whether they want to do it or not. And if they want to do it, I would encourage you to go ahead and give it a shot. Don't let equipment stop you. Use what you have. There are some relatively inexpensive things out there. There are free editing apps. There's really no reason to not do it. So just do it. Stop making excuses, because we were all, like we touched on, we'd all been in that contemplative stage, and whatever the spark was that finally got us off our butts to do it. And now here we are. You're a touch over 200 episodes. I'm creeping up on 200. You don't get there by just thinking about it. You gotta do. So.
And what is the pitch for your podcast, and what maybe for your guiding, and then also for your podcast, but podcast first? What are they going to get when they go there? Where can they find it? All that.
It's FullScale Outdoors Podcast. It's available pretty much everywhere podcasts are found. Also on my website, FullScaleOutdoors.com. The contact information is there as far as guiding is concerned as well. I guide summertime bass fishing here in Minnesota, fall goose hunts and fishing, ice fishing in the winter, and then snow geese in the Dakotas in the spring, and then right back around to fishing again. So I don't really have an off season when it comes to outdoor stuff. All the social medias, FullScale Outdoors on Facebook, FullScale_outdoors on Instagram. I'm on Snapchat, TikTok, which I never use. Well, TikTok, I should say, if I'm being honest, TikTok, I never upload content. I'm on it way too much, however, as a consumer.
Yeah.
That thing is addictive as can be. I need to delete that app off my phone. But yeah, that's all the expected ways to find me.
Great. Well, really appreciate you being on here. Take us a time out of your morning. Good luck going forward, and look forward to listening to some more good episodes.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
Take care.